So now that we split our components across multiple files, there also is another part of our project code that could also be split across multiple files. And that would be the styles. Now, of course, here in this project, I prepared some CSS styles for you because this is a React course, not a CSS course. Hence, we did not write all that CSS code from scratch. Nonetheless, this code here, this CSS code which I prepared for you, of course, in the end, contains all the styles that are applied here to the header and also the styles that are applied here to these core concept items. And therefore, you might want to split this CSS file also into multiple smaller component-specific CSS files. For that, for example, we could add a header.css file in the components folder next to the header.jsx file so that these two related pieces of code are closely together. And then here we could go back to index.css and grab all these header related CSS rules here. So all these rules which in the end start with header, cut them and remove them from index.css and add them to header.css instead. Now with that, you would see that if you save this, the styling is broken and these styles are gone. Because React and this project setup does not automatically include this header CSS file in the loaded web page. Instead, you have to tell the project and your code that this CSS file here should be included. And it's the same for the index CSS file, by the way. This is also not magically included. Instead, in the index.jsx file, we got this import statement here, which is responsible for including this index CSS file. And it's the same for the header CSS file. If it should be included, we have to import it. And we would typically do that inside of the component file to which those styles belong. And for this, we can add such an import statement where we import ./header.css. And thanks to that underlying build process, this import statement will be processed and the CSS code will be included in the loaded web page. Hence, if we save this, our styles are back. What's important to note here, though, is that importing such a CSS file in a component file will not scope these styles to that component. Which simply means that if we would use a header element somewhere else on our page, those styles here would be applied to that header element as well, even if it's not part of this header component. If I would add another header directly here in the app.jsx file with the built-in header element, and I would add a h1 element in there where I say hello world, this header would be styled by these styles here, even though we're not adding this code here in the header component. But because these styles here in the header CSS file are not scoped and limited to this header component, we would get those styles being applied to any header element on the page. And that's just something to be aware of. Splitting the CSS code into component-specific CSS files can still make sense, since it makes it easy to see which styles should relate to which component, and since it can make adjusting those styles easier. But it is important to be aware of this limitation, that these styles will not automatically be restricted to this component. Later in the course, you will learn about a solution to this potential problem though, and you will learn how the styles could be scoped. For the moment, we'll just leave it like this, and I'll get rid of this extra demo header here in the app component and save this project like this. You could now, of course, also extract all the core concepts styles if you wanted to, and extract all those styles into a core concept.css file if you wanted to, but here for this demo, I won't do that. What I will do though is I'll create a separate subfolder in the components folder for this header component, which I'll therefore also name header, and I'll move the header CSS and header JSX files into that subfolder. This is technically not required and also comes down to personal preference, but it can help with structuring your projects, since it can help ensure that you can always quickly find all the files that belong to a specific component. Now, with that folder structure changed here in the app.jsx file, I also have to adjust this import statement, because now the header.jsx file can be found in the header subfolder in the components folder. In addition, in the header.jsx file, we now also again have to adjust this image import, because now here we have to go up 2 levels to reach the source folder, where we can then dive into the assets folder. And with those adjustments made, if we save this now, everything works again as before, but now we also have the styles in a separate file, and we have this alternative folder structure.